It's not worth it. People down here, you think everybody's your friend. They're not your friend. Soon as you nod out, soon as you fall asleep, you're getting robbed. That's a guarantee, 100%. You are getting robbed.
Welcome to Kensington, a place where the very idea of safety seems almost meaningless, made painfully clear by rusty, red-capped syringes scattered beneath the Market Frankfurt overpass, remnants of lives caught in addiction and neglect. Standing here, I don't see a neighborhood. I see a harsh, unforgiving survival zone, where every instinct for self-preservation must stay on code red alert from the moment you step out of your car. The heavy, acrid stench of medical waste and decaying flesh linked to xylazine hits your senses like a blunt warning. Never let your guard down for even a second. Look at them zombies staggering with glazed, lifeless eyes, twisting into unnatural positions, ready to collapse or erupt into violence when a drug-induced high spirals into mania.
They just walk around and want to live like that. They just want to get high. So being down here, it'll teach you, like I said, keep your head on the swivel, but also teach you don't judge a book by its cover. When you come here, just act like you got some sense.
Who can honestly claim they're safe when every step might put you on a needle, a deadly vector for disease, or in the path of a shadowed muzzle brimming with hostility? Or have we silently accepted this chaos as the new order in Philadelphia? In Kensington, danger does not hide. It is brazen, defiant, and brutally direct. There is no room for leniency or comforting social euphemisms. Here, a single lapse in judgment can lead to disaster. This is an open, festering wound, a death market, where a human life is worth less than a hit of laced fentanyl.
Rotting flesh. These wounds are really bad. Whatever they're putting in this stuff, I mean, it's down to the bone. People, and they fall asleep with their wounds unwrapped, and they get bit by rats, and it's terrible. It's terrible.
Forget any distant promises of protection here. The only law that matters is the law of fear, with death waiting around every corner. This is no longer just an opioid problem. We are now in the age of Tranq dope, a deadly mix of fentanyl and xylazine that has practically transformed the sidewalk into a biological danger zone. If you believe the law will protect you here, you are already behind. The corner of Lehigh and Allegheny has become the center of this policy breakdown, where gunshots are nearly as routine as the constant sound of sirens. From a survival perspective, your awareness of your surroundings needs to be at full strength. The zombies may seem motionless, but the real threats, the predators, dealers, and crews guarding their blocks, are extremely alert.
I mean, you got people running around constantly stealing off of anybody that turns their head away from their things for 1 second. People nodding out, getting their stuff stolen. People need to get Narcan. They're dipping their pockets first. Make sure they get everything off them before they call the ambulance.
They do not want anyone recording their business, and they may use physical force to make sure your camera stays down. Even with aggressive crime-fighting efforts in 2024 to 2025, which sees tens of millions of dollars in drugs, especially fentanyl, and increased arrests in the East Division by 58%, Kensington, Philadelphia remains trapped in a deeply dangerous environment. Behind the eye-catching arrest and seizure numbers, these open-air drug markets often do little more than leave the main roads briefly before reappearing in side streets and hidden alleys, making security risks harder to predict. The The crisis grew even worse in late 2025 with the arrival of Rhino Tranq medetomidine. This powerful veterinary sedative does more than kill. It can leave users in a zombie-like condition, robbing them of behavioral control and putting heavy pressure on first responders. Alongside this expanding underworld comes a wave of everyday crimes, including broken car windows and stolen property. For nearby residents, simply walking out the front door each day has become a serious mental burden. With used syringes and medical waste constantly scattered around and unconscious addicts drifting aimlessly, Kensington has been locked into a brutal cycle and a security nightmare. What happens when the person in front of you no longer seems present? I'll show you how the city is trying to sweep this reality out of sight. In the end, you do not walk through Kensington. You escape it. This is not a documentary. It is a warning about what happens when the social contract is burned for a $5 hit. The harshest collateral damage falls on a group largely invisible to the street economy, the children. Consider the morning walk of a 9-year-old heading to an elementary school near the avenue. Their path becomes a tactical exercise through a biological minefield. Before they've even mastered their multiplication tables, they learn to spot the orange caps of discarded syringes. They carefully avoid adults frozen in unresponsive stupors just to reach the school entrance. Unsurprisingly, local schools have been forced to fortify their campuses like military outposts. Bulletproof glass and active shooter lockdown drills are now standard procedures. This constant exposure to street instability cultivates a severe form of intergenerational trauma. We are, in effect, teaching an entire generation to accept extreme public decay as a normal part of daily life. At a more detailed level, the medical system is the first to buckle. Walk into the emergency room at nearby Temple University Hospital on a Friday night and you're not witnessing routine urban care, you're seeing battlefield-style triage. Consider a veteran ER nurse on the graveyard shift. She no longer treats typical emergencies alone. Much of her time is spent debriding severe necrotic skin ulcers caused by xylazine. Because the Tranq additive drastically limits blood flow, minor scratches can quickly turn into rotting wounds exposing bone. Surgical wards are overwhelmed with preventable amputations. What happens when frontline antidotes fail and highly trained first responders are reduced to street corner palliative care? Narcan, the once miraculous reversal drug, has virtually no effect on veterinary sedatives. Paramedics cycle through critical resources, repeatedly treating the same unresponsive individuals, draining millions from the city budget, while fatality rates remain alarmingly high. Economically, the district functions like a ghost town under siege. Small businesses, the backbone of any healthy community, cannot withstand the relentless pressures of this environment. Storefronts along major streets are barricaded behind heavy corrugated steel, not only at night but even during the day. Customers disappear when the sidewalk outside a grocery store doubles as an open-air drug market. Unsurprisingly, property values collapse, wiping out generational wealth for working-class families trapped financially in the Badlands, while creating a domino effect that pushes the entire area into economic paralysis. Even public transit suffers. The Market Frankfurt line, the vital commuter train known as the L, frequently experiences major service interruptions. Transit workers are often forced to halt trains to remove biohazardous waste and unresponsive individuals from stations. When the working class cannot commute safely, the economic engine of the entire zip code comes to a standstill. This leads directly to the most contentious political issue, the theaters surrounding the crisis. Kensington has become a pawn in extreme ideological battles. Heavy-handed policies demanding mass arrests and zero tolerance clash sharply with harm reduction advocates distributing clean supplies to prevent secondary infections. If a city funds a public health crisis without demanding a clear path to recovery, is it truly saving lives or just maintaining a highly visible state-sanctioned hospice? This is a deeply polarizing and alarming reality. Current containment strategies often feel less like real solutions and more like calculated municipal decisions to confine the fallout to a single zip code, deliberately sacrificing Kensington so the rest of Philadelphia can operate more smoothly. Ultimately, the pressure-crushing Kensington illustrates a harsh truth. An unchecked street-level crisis never stays confined to the streets. It spreads rapidly, overwhelming hospitals, traumatizing children, bankrupting local economies, and fracturing the social contract itself, pushing the entire community to the brink of total collapse. The city's response to Kensington's breakdown has clearly moved from passive monitoring to aggressive neighborhood-level containment. This is no longer a matter of gentle public health outreach. The current strategy depends on forceful tactical sweeps. During late 2025 and early 2026, coordinated task forces began methodically breaking down the physical structure of activity along the avenue. That means sanitation crews in full hazmat gear power washing hazardous waste from the pavement, backed by a strong law enforcement presence trying to disrupt the deeply rooted street-level economy. Still, the layout of the neighborhood creates a harsh and unforgiving reality. What happens when a heavily concentrated illegal market is cleared out by force without fully cutting off the supply chain beneath it? The problem does not disappear. It splinters quickly, spreading into nearby neighborhoods that had been relatively stable and turning alleyways into temporary crisis zones. As a result, the recovery programs working directly on the street have had to radically change how they measure survival and success. The immediate front line is not centered on psychological counseling right now. It is focused almost entirely on urgent physical intervention. Independent nonprofits and rapid response medical teams are filling the enormous gap left by overwhelmed city hospitals. These workers operate mobile wound care clinics from converted vans, treating severe tissue damage at the curb in an effort to prevent devastating amputations. They're no longer just distributing clean supplies. They are actively working to physically stabilize a deeply compromised population under extremely hostile conditions. It's grueling, unglamorous, and endlessly repetitive work that prevents the local mortality rate from completely spiraling out of control. Yet, this aggressive effort at street clearance paired with makeshift medical triage creates a sharply polarized tactical environment. The current containment strategy is tearing the local political landscape apart. Is bringing in heavy machinery to bulldoze an encampment a true public safety achievement, or just a carefully staged illusion meant to reassure anxious taxpayers? Critics argue forcefully that simply displacing a highly volatile population without establishing mandatory long-term rehabilitation infrastructure is a catastrophic failure of urban management. In effect, the visible decay is scrubbed while the internal crisis continues completely unchecked. Ultimately, Kensington functions as a brutal, real-time stress test for other struggling American cities. Municipal leaders in San Francisco, Portland, and Chicago are closely observing this operational deep dive. They're watching to see whether a major first-world city can actually reclaim a compromised zip code, or if a permanent state of decay is the inevitable fate for any urban center that loses control of its street economy. The signals from the future are clear. Truly stabilizing this sector demands a ruthless, highly coordinated combination of uncompromising law enforcement and large-scale localized medical intervention. Anything less merely shifts the wreckage down the block. Out-of-state buyers can move into the area with unsettling ease, using the surrounding highway access and street grid to enter, make a purchase, and leave within a very short window. That speed is part of what makes the district so difficult to control. The neighborhood does not function like an isolated corner market. It operates more like a high-volume regional pipeline, pulling in demand from beyond Philadelphia and feeding a constant cycle of movement, cash, and risk. The area's physical accessibility also pushes street prices sharply downward, creating a hyper-competitive, volume-based retail environment. In a market where sellers compete through speed, availability, and price, highly dangerous synthetic substances can be obtained for far less than the cost of an ordinary fast food meal. That cheapness is not a minor detail. It is one of the core forces keeping the crisis alive, because it turns Kensington into a destination point for people seeking the lowest cost, highest potency product available. At the same time, the deeply controversial law enforcement strategy of the past decade has intensified the problem rather than containing it. For years, the dominant municipal approach appeared to rely on an unofficial policy of localized containment, often framed publicly as progressive restraint or practical harm reduction. Instead of aggressively disrupting the operational supply chains that sustain the trade authorities, largely managed the fallout within a narrow geographic boundary. In practice, this created something close to an invisible perimeter around the avenue with a heavy police presence that changed the behavior of officers on the ground. The rules of engagement became unclear and politically loaded. When armored police vehicles sit at major intersections, mainly to watch rather than dismantle the transaction cycle, the question becomes unavoidable. Are they protecting public order, or are they unintentionally providing taxpayer-funded security for an illicit economy? The result of this flawed tolerance was an extraordinary tactical advantage for regional distributors. By allowing the consumer reality to continue inside a tightly defined grid, the city sent a powerful signal. Whether intended or not, Kensington was a place where operational pressure would remain lower than in surrounding neighborhoods. Compared with adjacent districts, the friction here was minimal. Enforcement might appear visible, but its ability to fundamentally interrupt the system remained limited. That is why the root cause of this geographic disaster cannot be reduced to a localized chemical crisis alone. The substances on the street are only the most visible symptom of a much deeper structural collapse. Beneath them lies a multi-generational convergence of economic abandonment, unmatched transportation, convenience, political hesitation, and a municipal containment model that treated one zip code as disposable. Kensington became the place where the city's unresolved failures were concentrated, managed, and kept from spreading too visibly into more politically protected areas. Ultimately, this is the brutal logic behind the crisis. When a neighborhood is stripped of legitimate opportunity, surrounded by easy access routes, and governed through containment instead of transformation, a shadow economy does not merely appear. It hardens into infrastructure. It becomes predictable, profitable, and extremely difficult to uproot. Kensington's tragedy is not just that the street economy took hold. It is that the conditions around it allowed that economy to become the most stable system left standing. Kensington is not a civic graveyard. It is a deeply damaged, dangerously unstable extraction zone that the system appears to have written off as a total loss. The dominant story told outside its boundaries asks people to accept this zip code as a permanent and unavoidable casualty of modern urban decline. But when you examine these street-level details closely, it becomes clear that the core structure of a tough working-class community still exists. It has not disappeared. It has simply been buried beneath synthetic fallout. Are public resources truly being used to restart this broken system? Or is the administration quietly waiting for the current vulnerable population to fade away so private developers can aggressively gentrify what remains? From a logistical standpoint, you cannot arrest your way out of a major biological crisis, just as you cannot treat catastrophic economic abandonment with bandages. The current playbook sends heavily armored tactical units to scatter the illicit retail market, while sanitation crews pressure wash the pavement, functioning only as a surface-level response. It briefly improves the appearance of the avenue without addressing the devastating source of the infection. As a result, the reality on the street remains harsh and unforgiving. The civilians trapped inside this grid, families living behind steel barricades, and children walking through biohazardous routes to school are forced through a daily high-stakes test of survival while waiting for help that never truly comes. To stabilize this volatile area for good, the city must make a radical shift away from passive containment and toward aggressive, comprehensive restoration. Achieving this requires a large-scale coordinated deployment of heavy economic reinvestment, combined with a resilient high-capacity medical infrastructure. This is far beyond simply distributing clean supplies and hoping for the best. The plan calls for aggressively converting the vast abandoned industrial buildings that dominate the skyline into secure, comprehensive rehabilitation centers and vocational training hubs. If a multi-billion-dollar city can rapidly mobilize virtually unlimited resources to safeguard its high-end commercial districts, what operational rationale justifies leaving a historic neighborhood to operate as an unregulated open-air triage zone? Moreover, the physical consequences in the district show that localized tolerance is a mathematically flawed strategy. As long as illicit street markets are allowed to occupy the avenue, the systemic crisis will continue to threaten the stability of the surrounding region. The immediate dangers, the discarded biohazards, heavily armed crews, and constant risk of unpredictable street violence are only the most visible signs of deeper municipal neglect. At its core, Kensington is a gaping, actively bleeding wound in Philadelphia's structural framework. Yet beneath the crushing weight of the street-level crisis, the underlying heartbeat of the neighborhood stubbornly persists. Reclaiming this area is not an impossible tactical challenge. It is purely a question of political and logistical commitment. Complete extraction and systematic overhaul are entirely feasible, but the window for successful intervention is closing rapidly. Until city leadership decides to actively fight for this territory rather than merely manage its decline, Kensington will continue to stand as a harsh real-time warning to every major U.S. city facing similar structural and social pressures.